Welcome back to Legend Maker, my series of docudramas of the Umas that can sing the song Legend Changer. Legend Changer is a song that plays in the Uma Musume mobile game, with only, as of writing the script, 17 Umas capable of singing the songs. To be able to sing said songs, the singers must have one of the following criteria. Number 1, you must have the legacy of Saint Light, that is, win the classics Triple Crown. You can't win 1, you can't win 2, and you can't even win the Fall Senior Triple Crown. You must be a bearer of the 3 classics crowns. Number 2, you must have the legacy of Speed Symboli. That means making an impact overseas on the international stage. You can either be a pioneer that has started the international campaign, or be someone who has conquered a race overseas. Number 3, you must have the legacy of Haiseko. You have to be what many call an idle horse. That means reviving the sports of horse racing, or bring in fans who were originally not interested in the sport. You must be a horse who has made significant change in the eyes of the people of Japan. Those are the criteria needed to sing Legend Changer. And as usual, if you want to correct any of the mistakes I make, or you want to add something I haven't covered in Legend Maker 3, leave it in the comment section below. Seriously, I don't mind. I checked some of my past videos as a way to review, and I made a lot of them. Please, if I made a mistake, let me know. So, with that out of the way, let's begin the story of one of the lesser known and most mysterious Symboli horse who has pioneered international conquest for the JRA. The brightest star that shines upon the world. Sirius Symboli. Sirius, the brightest star visible from our planet. Known as the Dog Star due to it being part of the constellation of Canis Major, Sirius has had many different roles throughout human history. It's a particular star that many cultures have associated with dogs and wolves. To many cultures, like the Hindus and Egyptians, it is a herald of rain and floods, a bringer of harvests. To some, it is a warning of the changes of the seasons. To the Greeks, a bringer of hot weather, and to the Polynesians, a coming of winter. To the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians, it is a being of awe and reverence, a celestial star that journeys throughout the heavens. These civilizations would hold great feasts and celebrations in its honor whenever it graces them with its presence. But what Sirius was truly known for was its role as a guide. To the ancient Chaldeans, it was called the Dog Star that leads. To ancient China, the star was identified as a heavenly wolf, a symbol of strength and guidance. Many navigators have used this star to help them find their way home, a bright and silent guide that helps those who have lost their way. Sirius is a star of great prestige to the entire world. And to the staff in Symboli Ranch, it was a perfect name to give to one of the foals that were going to make a name for themselves in Japanese horse racing history. Sirius Symboli is one of the many horses who pioneered international conquest. He was an inspiration to many of the future horsemen who wanted to try their luck on the international stage, and an eye-opener on how one handles a horse on foreign lands for Japan. Not only that, but he was responsible for the Symboli Ranch's achievement of back-to-back victories at the Japanese Derby, where Sirius became Japan's 52nd Derby winner. Sirius was born in the Symboli Ranch in Monbetsu, Hokkaido, and he remained there until his yearling year. He would then move to the Iwate Symboli stable in the fall of that year, where he would receive foundational racehorse training. After that, he would then be moved to the Chiba Symboli stable for final preparations, which would lead to his debut. Sirius Symboli's sire was Mogami, who was a prestigious sire alongside Partholon in the Symboli Ranch. Originally from Europe, he spent his year there before he was transferred to Japan to become a breeding stud. He was known for siring many great racehorses, including the first ever Triple Tiara champion and the winner of the 1993 Japan Cup, Legacy World. His dam was Sweet Epsom, who did not have any particularly notable traits besides the fact that she was sired by Partholon. She never raced in her life and had no redeeming physical qualities of note. In fact, Sirius's older sister, Sweet Agnes, was considered to not have what it takes to race due to how frail she was since foalhood. Like her mother, she never raced in her life and was immediately turned into a broodmare. Suffice to say, not many had any high expectations on the horse due to his dam. Despite that, there were also some who held some form of hope for the young foal. When it came to the Symboli Ranch, there was one known factor that many people could attest to, and that was the ingenuity of its owner, Tomohiro Wada. He was the one responsible for creating legends such as the Emperor, Symboli Rudolph, and Speed Symboli, the first international Japanese challenger of the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. What really distinguishes him from his contemporaries at the time was his European-inspired philosophy of racehorse breeding, with some even calling him Japan's Federico Tessio, a renowned Italian horse breeder. His success was mainly attributed to his consistent and unique approach to horse racing in its entirety, from the moment the foal is born to the entire training regimen. He would constantly introduce European-style methods at the ranch, many complimenting him on his forward thinking despite the challenges he would face. So great was his talent that he was considered one of the best owners and breeders in Japan, alongside Yoshida Zenya of Shadai Ranch. These two were always incorporating innovations in training and conditioning while also developing and implementing new and unique methods for their breeding programs. Wada with his European-based methods and Yoshida with his American-style approach were one of the many non-racehorse rivalries in the JRA. Say what you want about Wada, but when one of the last words spoken by his rival on his deathbed was, "I want to see Wada," there is a certain amount of respect that must be given to the horseman. He was a man who contributed to the world of Japanese horse racing. But one of Wada's greatest contributions was his pursuit of overseas glory. While many of these dreams were not fulfilled, this pioneering spirit would inspire other challengers to test their might on the international stage. For Sirius, this would mean that he was born in a time where Wada's dream was reaching its zenith. Sirius was not a horse who drew attention. In fact, he was described as having an inconspicuous presence right after his birth. However, it was when he started to mature that the staff started to notice the horse's potential. Despite his young age, Sirius was known for having exceptional cardiovascular endurance, barely breaking a sweat even during strenuous exercises. He was also known for being able to catch his breath quickly, which impressed many who trained with him. Before they knew it, Sirius started to radiate a presence that demanded attention. He stood among his fellow Symboli horses, and before they knew it, he had secured his position as the most promising horse among his peers at the Symboli Ranch. An article written by Kunio Serizawa that dates to May 26, 1985 would say, "In 1984, just after Symboli Rudolph had achieved the Triple Crown, I visited Chiba Symboli Ranch together with trainer Nohira. I asked Minoru Watanabe, a former jockey and member of the farm's training staff, are there any 2-year-olds you expect great things from in the next year's classics? He immediately replied, yes, the horse's name is Sirius Symboli. He's by Mogami out of Sweet Epsom. He may not reach Rudolph's level, but he moves in a way that's close to it." This was the impression of the very former jockey who had trained Rudolph. I believe him 100% and immediately registered the horse in my POG. Just from this article, we can immediately infer that by late May to early June of his 1-year-old season, Sirius was already receiving very high praise at the Chiba Symboli stables. When he reached the age of 2, he was sent to be trained by the prestigious Nihon Yanagi Toshio at the Miho Training Center. He's known for training horses such as Hoyo Boy and Amber Shadai, who would be known for siring Meijiro Ryan. Nihon Yanagi was known as one of the best trainers of his generation, and the Symboli Ranch entrusted Sirius to him, stating, "He has the potential to win the Derby." With this, a dream has been established. Sirius would be the horse who would win Symboli Ranch's consecutive Derby victory in the span of 2 years. Sirius was the most promising 2-year-old among the horses entering the Nihon Yanagi stable that year. However, perhaps due to the change of environment and staff, Sirius's temperament would start to change, primarily during training. Trainer Nihon Yanagi would then decide to entrust this problem horse to one of his jockeys, Kazuhiro Kato. He hoped that the rider would be able to teach the colt on the art of racing. The most challenging aspect of Sirius's training was correcting his gait issue. Sirius disliked entering the narrow spaces of the starting gates, which usually end up with the horse starting late, a detrimental flaw for racehorses. Unless this flaw is corrected and overcome, Sirius's potential will not be fully realized. So, day after day, Kato, alongside Sirius, would repeatedly work on gait practice. It was a constant tug of war, because the problem isn't that Sirius was bad at leaving the gate. It was that Sirius hated being in the gate. From Sirius's point of view, being forced into the gates that he already hated every single day was unbearable. He would constantly rear up and buck inside the gate, with Kato leaving training with fresh wounds on his body every single day. Kato has his work cut out for him, and if Sirius's dislike for gates weren't bad enough, the looming deadline of his debut race was fast approaching, something that would determine if Sirius had what it takes to be a Derby winner. Sirius would debut in his maiden race on September 16, 1984 at the Nakayama Racecourse. He would be the second favorite to win, probably due to the fact that he was a Symboli horse. Despite all of Kato's efforts in trying to change Sirius's gait issue, he wasn't able to do it in time. After all, it takes time to break one's habit, and the same applies to Sirius. In his debut race, he started late, but it was because of his late start that Sirius's potential was demonstrated to Japan. Even though he was positioned in the far back, Sirius was still able to overtake every single horse by the time he got to the finish line. He demonstrated then and there his superior ability, that there was a new upcoming champion that has come out of the Symboli Ranch. However, that did not change the fact that Sirius started late. The only reason Kato and Sirius didn't get too much criticism was due to the fact that they won. But this late start would mark the beginning of something even bigger down the line. After that, they would then move on to the Fuyo Tokubetsu. This time, he was the favorite. But in this race, Kato would make a crucial error on the final straight. Just like in his debut race, Sirius started late. But the team expected this. They wanted to utilize the burst of speed Sirius displayed last time, thinking it was all they needed to win. However, on the final straight, Sirius was boxed in and was blocked by the wall of racers ahead of him. Without any ways of breaking out, Sirius couldn't use the same spurt he displayed in his previous race. Despite this, Kato tried to find a way out, urging Sirius to go wide. He would then see an opening ahead of him, which he would immediately take. Sirius, as if he was waiting for this moment, would then unleash his trademark burst of speed, and he would secure his second win of the season. Or so it would seem. Unfortunately, when Kato and Sirius forced themselves to break out of the blockade, they cut off and obstructed the path of a racer. This movement was deemed dangerous and illegal, and Sirius was disqualified from the race. And Wada did not take that lightly. "We should have won that race easily, but the jockey's mistake cost us the victory," Wada would say as people described him flying into a rage due to the mistake. Regarding this disqualification in the Fuyo Tokubetsu, there exists a record stating there was a rare case where he lost a victory due to a first place disqualification. From this, we can see that at the time, a first place disqualification was considered quite an unusual incident. It did not help that there was a superstitious rumor that circulated around back in those days. Horses with a history of disqualifications will never achieve greatness. Jinxes aside, horses who usually do not secure a second win after their maiden race were usually subjugated to complications in racing schedules, due to them not being consistent. It didn't help that the hopes of the Symboli Ranch were thrust upon Sirius's shoulders. Sure, he wasn't as great as Rudolph, but he had potential. He could win Symboli Ranch's second consecutive derby win. And with his second win taken from him, his chances of that dream coming true were now further from their reach. Thanks to trainer Nihon Yanagi though, Wada's wrath was quelled before it became a major issue. However, this stumble would lead to one of Wada's greatest mistakes in his career. Sirius would then head towards his third race, the Icho Tokubetsu. Despite his blunder, Kato was still deemed worthy of riding Sirius. Perhaps Wada allowed him to do so as an extension of goodwill. Unfortunately, whether it was due to Sirius's immaturity or Kato feeling the pressure of not being allowed to fail, Sirius got off to a late start once again. We may never know why exactly, but the fact remains that Sirius was once again at the very rear of the pack. Sirius would stay in the back until the fourth corner. Despite being last, he was still able to fiercely charge ahead from the very back. Unfortunately, he would meet interference along the way, and Sirius would lose the race by a nose. And as you can imagine, Wada wasn't too happy with the results. This would mark the beginning of what would be known as the Sirius Symboli controversy. A little disclaimer here, this is going to get really complicated. There are a lot of people involved in this controversy, and I tried to explain at least the bare minimum of who everyone is that were involved in the story. So if there are any inconsistencies or random people start appearing in the story that I haven't mentioned before, I'm really sorry. I tried to condense this as much as possible. Please pay attention because like most controversies, this is really complicated. The Sirius Symbolic controversy was widely known at the time as a clash between two individuals, Tomohiro Wada and Toshio Nihon Yanagi. Wada demanded that Kato would be switched out for another jockey, while Nihon Yanagi insisted that Kato stayed as Sirius's jockey. However, it was far more complicated than that. Following the loss of the Icho Tokubetsu, and by consequence because of the Fuyo Tokubetsu's disqualification, there were newspaper reports stating how Wada wanted to replace Kato with another jockey. That jockey was Yukio Okabe. But before that could happen, Nihon Yanagi saw the article. The switch itself wasn't the problem. The real problem was that Nihon Yanagi learned about the switch of jockeys through the newspaper, not Wada himself. This led to Nihon Yanagi becoming furious, thinking Wada was using the media as a way to make the switch a fait accompli before Nihon Yanagi could do anything. This would be the beginning of the unfortunate reality that Sirius had to endure before his grand race at the Japanese Derby. Yukio Okabe isn't a stranger. He's a pretty familiar face. With his fame being tied to one of the greatest racehorses in Japanese horse racing history, and Wada's greatest masterpiece, Symboli Rudolph, the undefeated classics emperor. And Okabe was supposed to replace Kato. Just a couple of months earlier, he and Rudolph would win their 4th G1 race at the Arima Kinen. When it came to racing tactics, Wada was knowledgeable, and he deduced that Okabe had what it takes to teach Sirius how to race while nurturing his growth. An associate of Wada, Tamehada, also shared Wada's thought process, expressing how Okabe's riding style suited Sirius, who was known for his late starts. Okabe was considered at his peak at the time. He was talented and brought in results due to his strategic and sometimes unconventional riding tactics, although he would probably attribute most of his successes to Rudolph teaching him, but I digress. Throughout those times, gossips would start to circulate from the fans of the JRA, with some of them going along the lines of, "Isn't Okabe a sorcerer? He must be using some form of magic." It's also notable to keep in mind that Wada's mindset when it came to horse racing was more Western than his fellow horsemen. Since Wada's dream was to challenge the world, he was knowledgeable when it comes to foreign customs, primarily those in Europe. It's because of this mindset that Wada believed that it was within the natural rights of the owner to switch the jockeys of his horses at will. It was commonplace in Europe to switch in top jockeys to ensure the best chances of attaining victory in major races. This is why he believed that Okabe should take the reins from Kato. It was the most natural decision. Okabe was at his peak, and he trusted the talented jockey more than anyone. It should have been no problem whatsoever. Despite this logic, trainer Nihon Yanagi refused to listen to Wada's decision to change jockeys. He wanted Kato, whom he viewed as an apprentice, to continue jockeying Sirius. He would defend Kato by saying how he was by no means inferior to Okabe when it came to skill. In his eyes, Okabe may have more wins, but Kato's win percentage was also exceptionally high at the time. Okabe had only made it into the top 5 in the win percentage category of the Outstanding Jockey Award once. Kato, on the other hand, had already achieved it 3 times within his 10 years of jockeying, since his debut in 1975. Even if the horses he rode were of great quality due to the ranch he was affiliated with, it didn't change the fact that Kato's record and achievements were impressive. Plus, at the time, it wasn't really fair to compare Kato and Okabe. Jockey Kato had only ridden 81 times the previous year in 1984, compared to Okabe who had ridden 544 times. This was primarily due to Kato turning down riding requests from anyone that wasn't the ranch he was affiliated with. Due to this fact, and because Nihon Yanagi constantly had to see his apprentice return home covered in bruises due to his training sessions with Sirius, Nihon Yanagi would assert that his decision of switching Kato for Okabe was entirely impossible in his eyes, showing his distrust of Wada's methods. This mindset that Wada had about the owners having absolute authority would soon fall out of practice. It may have been common sense back in the day to entrust a stable's main jockey to handle their horses, but it isn't as popular nowadays. It was even more so uncommon for a trainer to have his own apprentice ride horses of his own stables, as shown later with the late Tamio Toyama, who raced Mihono Bourbon. It is now more common these days to see this kind of relationship, but as you know, different times yield different minds. So, back then, it was uncommon. And it's not like Nihon Yanagi was the only supporter of Kato. There were some fans of Kato who were willing to give their own testimonies and opinions following the aftermath of the Fuyu Tokubetsu and Icho Tokubetsu in the Yushin magazine. In the newspapers, he was being called a disqualified jockey and a jockey with heart problems. Since I have never once seen Sirius race in person, I cannot comment on his riding in the disqualification race or in the race he lost that he could have won. But I could not understand the words and actions of those who treated him as second-rate or worse. It even felt strange to me. Today, the details of Sirius' second and third races are no longer widely known. As a result, what tends to be highlighted is only the owner's harsh criticisms of riding mistakes. However, knowing that there were journalists and fans at the time who wrote reports of this nature allows us to view the situation from a different perspective. What is important here is that Jockey Kato himself was a very excellent rider. It would not be an exaggeration to say that there is no jockey in the world who has never made a mistake. Kato was not only skilled in riding, but was also regarded as a person of warm character, someone who valued his family and possessed admirable courage. The real issue of this situation may have been during the early part of Sirius' 2-year-old season, a crucial developmental period when a horse must learn many things through racing. These incidents happened consecutively, and like most controversies, each person interpreted those events differently. Tomohiro Wada, Toshio Nihon Yanagi. Both of these men held strong beliefs on their views of horse racing. These beliefs would lead them to this conflict. It did not help that both of their methods yielded great results. This resentment would continue to fester, with the end result being that reconciliation was nearly impossible. So far, the controversy started because of an argument between the owner and trainer of Sirius, fighting over who would continue to jockey the upcoming horse. Already, this controversy is not going off to a great start. Despite this, Sirius still had a career to do, so they had to come to a decision. Nihon Yanagi insisted on retaining Kato for Sirius's participation in the Fuchu Sansai Stakes. And, as if to prove Wada wrong, Kato and Sirius won the race by a neck. Even if Kato was plagued by failures until that moment, this time he rode flawlessly. No late starts, no disadvantages. They both secured their second win. Unfortunately, this victory came too late. Wada's distrust has moved beyond Kato and was now directed onto Nihon Yanagi himself. If that wasn't bad enough, despite consistently delivering good results, Sirius started to develop recurring leg problems. It was because of this that the plans to challenge the race known as the Junior Championship, the Asahi High Sansai Stakes, were cancelled. At the time, Symboli Ranch had adopted a de facto off-site training system, where race preparations were conducted at the ranch pasture rather than in the stables. Wada had already put this methodology into practice, which is said to be one of the main driving points behind the Shadai Group's growth and rising dominance in the early 21st century. Except this methodology backfired for Sirius. What should have emphasized coordination between pasture and stable ended up biting Sirius on the flank. Due to the mutual distrust between Wada and Nihon Yanagi, they weren't able to really ascertain Sirius and adjust to his needs. Because of this, they weren't able to notice Sirius's injury, and before anyone knew it, Sirius couldn't race. The distrust between them would continue to fester. Before anyone knew it, Sirius Symboli, the so-called secret weapon of the Symboli Ranch and one of the top contenders of his generation, hasn't raced since the Fuchu Sansai Stakes. Between that race and his future race, 4 months have already passed, and time would just keep on passing. This would have been the time where he challenged the Asahi High, but Sirius's first season of racing ended with the horse not even running. So now, not only is there an argument of Sirius's jockey situation, but the two horsemen were so busy fighting over this that they weren't able to pick up on the fact that Sirius was starting to develop physical injuries. This made it that many of the races that Sirius was supposed to participate in had to be cancelled. Even as the new year passed, there were no signs of improvement between the two men. The bridge between Wada and Nihon Yanagi continued to deteriorate, which only worsened as the classics started to approach. And finally, the metaphorical kettle reached a boiling point. If you're so unhappy, just transfer him to another stable. In response to Nihon Yanagi's words, Wada transferred Sirius to another stable, bringing about the end of their partnership. And, well, unfortunately, it doesn't end there. Sirius had been undergoing training in preparation for the Wakaba show on March 30th. At the time, the JRA required horses to be transferred to new stables at least 10 days prior to their scheduled race. Sirius was scheduled to return to the ranch from the stable on March 20th, exactly 10 days before the race. He would then enter the Miho Training Center on the same day as a horse that belonged to the Nihonbashi stable. However, there was a sudden arrangement to have Sirius transferred to the stable of Shigenori Hatakeyama, whose younger brother served as an executive at the Symboli Ranch. It was almost as if Wada wanted to taunt Nihon Yanagi that there were other, better options to train Sirius than the former trainer's stable. It seemed that Wada and Nihon Yanagi had come to an agreement by then. But despite claims of Nihon Yanagi appearing calm and collected during the meeting, Hatakeyama, who was also present, seemed nervous. Many trainers have attempted to mediate the relationship between Wada and Nihon Yanagi. Their efforts proved futile, and the conflict between the two horsemen over who would jockey Sirius continued to grow until the entirety of the racing world was starting to feel it. By then, the conflict seemed to finally head towards a resolution after Sirius's transfer. Sirius, now a member of the Hatakeyama stable, will compete in the Wakaba show as his first race of his 3-year-old year. Okabe would be his jockey in this race, as per Wada's wishes, and he would then proceed directly towards the classics after. That didn't change the fact that the racing world was still on edge. The uproar over the stable conflict was still widely known and felt throughout the nation. The prospect of this situation dragging on has many worried that it would ruin Sirius's future. The fact that Sirius can rest was seen as a moment of respite for the poor horse. Nihon Yanagi would receive the brunt of this uproar, but it was reported that he was accepting of it, as if he likely foresaw this outcome. So, now the timeline looks like this. Wada and Nihon Yanagi started this fight because of the change of jockey's situation, which then led to Sirius getting injured and not being able to race, which then led to the end of their partnership and the transfer of Sirius to a different stable that had no Nihon Yanagi or Kato. Just all of this is complicated enough. But, unfortunately, it doesn't end there. The turmoil would suddenly reignite unexpectedly, and the situation descended into an even deeper quagmire. Kanto Labor, one of the labor unions composed of stable hands, stated that this stable transfer resulted in unfair treatment of union members and caused unnecessary friction among them. which would then be followed by a request of negotiations with the Trainers Association. The prize money system for Japanese horse racing allocated 80% to the owner, with the remainder redistributed as follows: 10% to the trainer and 5% each to the jockey and stable staff as contribution fees. As a result, the income of stable hands will vary significantly depending on whether they are assigned to horses that can win races. However, in the Sirius Symboli controversy, the transfer was decided based on the conflict between the owner and the trainer, completely disregarding the stable hand's wishes. If this sets a precedent and becomes common practice, the stable hands won't be able to handle it. Can you see where this is going? If you don't really understand, then let me try to clarify it a little bit more. The staff members who were working on Sirius couldn't earn money at all. Money comes in depending if a horse wins, but if a horse isn't racing at all, then they are barely getting anything, if they are even receiving anything. Because Sirius didn't participate in any races since the Fuchu Sansai stake and his future Wakaba show, the stable hands weren't able to make any money. And it wasn't because of an uncontrollable situation like Sirius getting injured during a race. It was because two men were having a spat on who would jockey Sirius. Now, this controversy is affecting the staff members who had nothing to do between WADA and Nihon Yanagi's argument. If this continues on, most of the staff of Symboli Ranch would be paid nothing. Though, after that, the stable hands assigned to Sirius at Nihon Yanagi's stable did bow their heads to trainer Nihon Yanagi, as if to apologize for them going against their superior. Honestly, this just goes to show how respected Nihon Yanagi was despite dragging his team down with him. Well, I suppose there's no helping it. Despite saying that, that didn't change the fact that the situation had now escalated beyond a squabble between two horsemen into a political issue. No longer was it confined to a conflict between a single owner and a single trainer, or even a single stable. And plus, the timing coincided with the spring labor negotiations period, and a major obstacle had suddenly been thrown into the scheduled labor management talks between the Stable Hands Union and the Trainers Association. Furthermore, the stable transfer controversy and its subsequent escalation left even trainer Hatakeyama, who had taken over Sirius, feeling perplexed. While originally close to Symboli Ranch, he found himself completely caught up in this transfer situation. Given his inherently gentle nature, as reported by many, the more the situation escalated and the stronger the reaction from those around him became, the greater his anguish inevitably grew. The situation took another major turn on the 28th. On the surface, thanks to the mediations of Hatakeyama, WADA and Nihon Yanagi were able to hold discussions once more, and Sirius was finally able to return to the Nihon Yanagi stables. Regarding the jockeys at the heart of the conflict though, reports indicate that efforts were being made to resolve the situation by having jockey Okabe ride in the Wakaba show and jockey Kato ride in the Satsuki show. For WADA, it was a proposal that he fundamentally found unacceptable but ultimately couldn't do anything against. This led to speculation that the Stable Hands Union may have threatened to refuse all horses from the Symboli Ranch, or that the Trainers Association feared the impact if they linked it to the spring labor's negotiation and launched a full-scale strike. Whatever the case, Sirius ended up returning to the Nihon Yanagi stable just about a week after being transferred. A week. However, it is also true that this mediation proposal did not resolve the essence of the situation. WADA was forced to return the horse to the staff member with whom his trust had been broken down, resulting in the worst possible outcome. Meanwhile, trainer Nihon Yanagi and jockey Kato had finally come to terms with the horse's departure, only to have the same horse returned to them immediately. The unfolding of the Sirius Symboli controversy proved unfortunate for both WADA's side and Nihon Yanagi's side. Incidentally, Sirius' transfer from the Nihon Yanagi stable to the Hatakeyama stable lasted, like I said, only a week. Because of this transfer, Sirius didn't have any time to train, which led to the political problem, and which now affects both the Nihon Yanagi stable and the Hatakeyama stable. Nihon Yanagi, to his credit, did express deep regret for having drawn Hatakeyama into the controversy. He would subsequently continue to give half the trainer's share of the prize money earned by Sirius to Hatakeyama. And well, despite having a very eventful 1 week, Sirius' career needs to continue. So in the Wakaba show, Sirius, who was formerly registered by trainer Hatakeyama, would have Okabe take the reins at the request of WADA. Though the ride carried tremendous pressure, Okabe lived up to expectations. He broke cleanly and settled into a good position as if it were natural, delivering victory for Sirius. That victory was precisely the kind of champion's win that WADA had hoped for Sirius Symboli. WADA's comment after the Wakaba show race differed slightly in nuance depending on the media outlet, but the next day's sports paper read, "As expected, Okabe-kun's riding style is in a league of its own," he would remark, suggesting that his dissatisfaction with jockey Kato's racing was by no means flawed. Having won the Wakaba show, Sirius Symboli would then skip the subsequent Satsuki show to focus solely on the Derby. The reason given for skipping the Satsuki show was leg concerns, but this announcement came solely from WADA with no comment from Nihon Yanagi. Instead, comments of bewilderment emerged. The timing of the announcement also came the day after reports surfaced that Okabe was confused. This followed Wada's statement that he did not promise jockey Kato's return for the Satsuki show when transferring stables, leading Wada to request Okabe to ride in the Satsuki show. Except Okabe had already received a request to ride Scroom Dyna, the previous year's Asahi High Sansai Stakes winner. This gives the possibility that Okabe couldn't ride Sirius due to schedule concerns, and unfortunately, or fortunately depending on who you ask, Sirius wasn't Rudolph. But that wasn't the only claim that circulated about the skipping of the Satsuki show. Wasn't the decision to skip the Satsuki show a way to let the dust settle after the stable controversy? It was inevitable that such observations would circulate. But the unfortunate thing is, we will never know. After all, no matter what the true reason was, Symboli Ranch had a reputation to keep. And, well, a day after he withdrew from the Satsuki show, Sirius was doing a 1-mile workout at the Symboli Ranch. And as you know, this leads to a very familiar story, but we'll get into that later. That year's Satsuki show was one to remember, because the winner was Miho Shinzan, the racer who bears the blood of the second Triple Crown champion. He achieved a commanding 5-length victory. These results ignited within the populace the possibility of a third consecutive Triple Crown winner, following Mr. CB in 1983 and Symboli Rudolph in 1984. Perhaps it was because of the appearance of Miho Shinzan that this fueled the desire to reclaim the honor and pride lost in the stable transfer controversy through a back-to-back Derby victory. And Sirius's most recent workout reminded everyone of his unfathomable potential. On the day after the Satsuki show, the horse that Sirius Symboli would have to face was none other than the Emperor, Symboli Rudolph, who was preparing for the Spring Tenno show, which will happen just a week later. Symboli Rudolph, renowned for his 7 G1 wins, possessed a formidable power and presence that destroyed opponents in various ways. It was said that he would cause training partners to sustain injuries one after another or drive them into yips, a condition where they refused to run by making them acutely aware of the gap in class. Because of this, the horses used as partners for Symboli Rudolph's workouts at the stable were reportedly taken in turn by horses owned by the Symboli Ranch themselves, to avoid inconveniencing other owners and trainers. However, the 1-mile workout with Symboli Rudolph at the Symboli Ranch ended with Sirius Symboli closing onto Rudolph, finishing neck and neck. While Okabe rode Sirius, it was also true that Symboli Rudolph carried the handicap of being ridden by trainer Nohira, who had long since retired from riding. But even then, that didn't change the fact that someone had defeated the Emperor. For Symboli Rudolph, who had until then lacked any worthy opponents for even a proper workout, the emergence of a 2-year-old rival capable of competing on equal terms was a huge surprise to the Symboli Ranch team. The fact that it was a horse from their own stable only made them even more ecstatic. "We've got the Derby again this year!" the jubilant cry echoed through the Symboli Ranch. The Sirius Symboli controversy was a giant mess that has affected Sirius's career in Japan. As you saw, this controversy was a messy situation that greatly affected Sirius's early years. What started off as an argument about who would ride Sirius turned into a petty back and forth, which then started to affect the staff at the Symboli Ranch, which ultimately ended with Sirius barely using his potential until his race at the Japanese Derby. The worst part of it was that it could have easily been avoided. I mentioned earlier that the main reason Nihon Yanagi was angry wasn't because of the switch, but because he learned of the switch from a newspaper that Wada didn't tell him directly. Turns out, it was probably all a big misunderstanding. There's a story that this article was written by a newspaper reporter who overheard words Wada had privately confided to someone close to him. That reporter would then publish those claims without authorization. If the newspaper article had not appeared, it would remain unknown whether Wada would have requested the switch from Kato to Okabe to trainer Nihon Yanagi. If that wasn't bad enough, Nihon Yanagi would later state, "If Wada-san had gone through the proper channels and requested a transfer after that special event, I would have done as he asked." They were talking from the start. There was just an unfortunate misunderstanding between them. But this misunderstanding unfortunately escalated into the Sirius Symboli controversy. The conflict between Wada and Nihon Yanagi manifested superficially as a demand to change jockeys for Sirius Symboli. However, the emotional rift between the two made discussion and compromise extremely difficult, with relationships now rendered to nothing. But they can't dwell too long on this, because the race that everyone at Symboli Ranch has their eyes on was soon approaching: the Japanese Derby. Before the Japanese Derby, Sirius was scheduled to run in the Satsuki Show, and then after the NHK High. But, as mentioned earlier, Sirius skipped the Satsuki Show due to leg concerns, with some trying to also pin the blame on the stable controversy. While those were the rumors that circulated around the withdrawal, it was more likely the former rather than the latter. For the leg concerns, after a post-derby interview, Nihon Yanagi would comment, "We didn't use him in the Satsuki Show or the NHK High, and although various things were said during the interview, the horse's condition had improved." Notice how he said didn't use instead of couldn't use. Some people came to the conclusion that it was intentional for Sirius to not race in the Satsuki Show. This is also further proven by other claims from Yushun. The withdrawal from the Asahi High Sansai Stakes was stated to be due to leg problems. The withdrawal of the NHK High was also stated to be due to hoof bruising during training. His dam and older sister were known for weak constitutions, something the team still kept an eye on despite Sirius's potential. Even before Sirius went abroad, there were comments from the staff about how they should train Sirius while carefully keeping in mind Sirius's legs. There were even comments on how Sirius's legs appeared weak, with manager Okada confirming that the horse's legs really did look a little worse for wear. But with the skipping of the Satsuki Show and NHK High, Sirius and his team can place their entire focus on the Japanese Derby. The Japanese Derby is one of the most prestigious races in Japanese horse racing. It is the second crown of the Classics Triple Crown and is known as the most technical race of the Classics, testing a horse's skills and techniques. It is also known as the Test of Luck and the Festival of Racing. It is run at a distance of approximately 2,400 meters in length, and it takes place at the Tokyo Racecourse in Fuju, Tokyo, where horses of 3 years can participate in late May or early June. And Sirius and his team are planning to conquer this race to win the Symboli Ranch's second consecutive Derby victory. However, around this time, there were complications that were unfolding in the Derby front. Miho Shinzan, son of Japan's second Triple Crown bearer, Shinzan, had just conquered the Satsuki Show. He was assured as the favorite to win the Derby, with some hoping that he could become a sire-to-foal consecutive Triple Crown champion. Unfortunately for Miho Shinzan, it would soon be discovered that he sustained a fractured bone due to his previous race. Thus, he had to withdraw from the race and dash all hopes for his run at the Derby. Now that the would-be champion has withdrawn from the race, the Japanese Derby was considered a wide-open contest. Even with the runner-up of the Satsuki Show attending, many were still unsure if they themselves were capable of winning the Derby. Miho Shinzan was deemed too powerful a horse, and no one had any expectations for the challengers he competed against, which leaves them with Sirius Symboli. Despite not competing for a long time, people still remembered Sirius's untapped potential. Even if he was involved in many controversies and rumors, it was precisely because of that many had their eyes on the young Symboli. They recognized his strength and the prospect of a potential Derby horse who comes from the Symboli Ranch, the very same ranch that raised the Emperor, Symboli Rudolph, and trained by the prestigious Nihon Yanagi stable. Well, let's just say that the appeal was very alluring amidst the fierce competition. Unfortunately, due to not running in the NHK High, one of the Derby prep races, Sirius's probability would not be so high. Despite WADA wanting Okabe to ride Sirius, he was scheduled to ride Scrum Dyna, one of Miho Shinzan's rivals and the runner-up for the Satsuki Show. Because of the skipping of the NHK High and the agreement for Sirius's jockey situation, Kato, who was supposed to ride Sirius in the NHK High, would ride him in the Derby. A race that would be Sirius's first race with Kato after 6 months. That just so happens to be a G1 race and one of the most prestigious races in all of Japan. Suffice to say, people were not confident in the Kato-Sirius pair compared to the Okabe-Sirius pair. And there was also fresh new blood in this competition. Many of the top contenders of the Satsuki Show raced in the NHK High and the Aoba Show, both prep races for the Derby. They all lost, which allowed other competitors to join and secure a position in the Derby. If that wasn't concerning enough, there was also the fact that it rained for most of the week before the Derby. The track would significantly deteriorate, and with the ground saturated with water, it would continue to be altered due to the races that were held prior to the Derby. It would officially be described as a heavy track, but the ground would actually become a hard, difficult surface, which is considered worse to run on than a poor track. And Sirius had to run on the Tokyo Racecourse with 25 other horses. Because of all these conditions, whispers of an upset began to circulate. With the absence of Miho Shinzan, the Derby could be anyone's. Sirius was backed as the favorite. However, it was more accurate to say that he was pushed into the top spot, since despite him coming from a prestigious farm, he still had all of his controversies, which made many unsure of his abilities to really win. He would be the number 1 favorite, but not by much, passing the second and third favorite, Suda Hawk and Sakura Sunny O. Despite this uncertainty, Sirius still has nothing else to do but race. So they listened to the fanfare, got into their starting gates, and the 50-second Japanese Derby begins. The race started to what was considered a scattered start. Unlike the previous years, none of the horses got off to a good start, and no one attempted to move into the inner rail as competitors would usually do. Due to the track conditions and the races that came before the Derby, the intersection of the track was a complete mess. It was so bad that some spots had the turf gouged out, leaving patches that were no different to dirt. If any horse were to run there, they would have a terrible time. Many of the jockeys have deemed it strategic to keep to the outer track. Even if the horses would run a longer distance, it was way better than to trudge in what was essentially mud. This decision was something every jockey took into consideration before the Derby, especially when they saw the few who took the risk of sinking into the mud. So instead of horses fighting for a position within the inner track, the 50-second Derby saw something truly unusual. Horses from the inner gates, who would usually adore said positioning, trying to find a moment to push into the outer track. By the first corner, there were barely any horses in the inner track. By the second corner, another unusual sight would be seen. The spectators got a view of all of the front runners approaching the far straight from the center instead of the inner track, which made a very weird event for those who were used to seeing them run from the inner track. There was only one competitor, Joe Dash, who took the risk of running in the inner rail, hoping to make a last-minute comeback. Spoiler, he finished dead last. But this would just prove that the rest of the jockeys made the right call. Sirius was among the other horses, running a bit outside of the middle of the track. He was positioned around 8th or 9th, slightly ahead of the rest of the pack. Because of the track's conditions and the extra distance that they have to run, staying too far back was considered far too risky. No, they wouldn't even make it if they kept this up. So, Kato decided that they had to make their move now. On the far turn, he urged Sirius to move far outside, where there would be no contenders. This surprised everyone, since many considered Kato's move to have been made too recklessly, with even Nihon Yanagi turning pale and gasping too early as he watches the race. But for Kato, it was a calculated move. He knew Sirius like the back of his hand. Not only did Sirius dislike the poor track conditions, but he also hated crowded races where he would get jostled. Kato didn't want to force a scenario where Sirius had to navigate his way through a herd of horses on the final straight. To him, the only way to avoid this scenario was to forcefully move outside, where none of these factors can even touch Sirius. It was after the third corner that the race started to really heat up. The second favorite, Sudahawk, started to make his move. From the end of the pack, he pushed forward towards the front with admirable strength. During his race at the Yayoi show, he also had to struggle through a messy track. What was a curse back then turned out to be a blessing now, and Sudahawk was able to adapt and charge on from the very back. As they passed the last corner, Sudahawk took the lead. On that day, what many would consider the far outside was the innermost position, and Sudahawk was charging forward. He passed every single competitor, and now, just a couple of meters ahead of him, the Derby crown lied in wait, and he was about to seize it. Sirius, as if from nowhere, emerged from the far outside. Both he and Kato had made their move at the same time as Sudahawk, and now they will show everyone who really deserves the Derby crown. In this very moment, the 50-second Japanese Derby turned into a one-on-one. Sudahawk, who was doing well until now, started to lose traction. He may have done well in the Yayoi show, whose conditions were terrible, but it was nothing compared to the turf of that year's Derby. His acceleration started to diminish on the home stretch. Sirius, on the other hand, would not show a single hint of slowing down. Right then and there, he demonstrated the potential that everyone saw in him. With extraordinary power, he unleashed an amazing final kick that showed no signs of being hindered by the poor track and the wide outside route that he took. Sirius would then catch up to Sudahawk and pass him immediately after drawing level to him. And Sudahawk, as if losing hope after seeing Sirius pass him, let the increasing gap widen. Sirius shot through the track like a shooting star in the night sky, and after practically running from the outer rail the entire race, Sirius Symboli would win the Japanese Derby by a 3-length lead. And as his partner crossed the finish line, Kato couldn't help but celebrate their victory. Clearly under the pressure of the controversies and the expectations surrounding the duo, Kato instinctively throws up his right fist in the air after they immediately cross the finish line, showing to the entirety of Japan that the both of them were Derby champions. On May 26, 1985, Sirius Symboli would become the 52nd Japanese Derby champion, claiming the title of second consecutive Derby champion for Tomohiro Wada and the Symboli Ranch. Just a year after the victory of the Emperor Symboli Rudolph. This would be Wada's third Derby win. Unfortunately, Wada was not able to witness the race due to suffering from a fever of 39 degrees Celsius. Due to his age, he stayed at home while he sent his wife and associates to witness the race. At the moment Sirius crossed the finish line, Takayama's expression changed. Large tears seemed ready to fall. Nearby, Yoko Wada and stable manager Masayoshi Kirisawa, sent as substitutes for the owner, trembled with joy and shook hands firmly. While Wada was absent from the award ceremony, he was still proud of Sirius's victory. He would congratulate Kato on his phenomenal riding, but he would still have his complaints. For Wada, a self-proclaimed perfectionist in everyone and himself, he did not turn a blind eye to Kato's risky move both during and after the race. He criticized Kato's early spurt, but Kato was able to explain why he made this decision, with trainer Nohira even praising his riding and quick thinking. His next point though was about the fist pump. I don't like the victory pose after crossing the finish line either. The quality of the stop immediately after crossing the finish line can lead to injury. When you need to smoothly change leads, taking one hand off the reins to make a victory pose is unprofessional. While many fans might enjoy such flashy K-ring style displays, it makes me shudder when I think of the horse's welfare. Jockey Okabe would never do such a thing. It shows the difference in their strictness towards racing. Wada would state how Kato's victory pose would burden Sirius, especially after he worked himself to the bone during the race. His criticisms were not without reason, since there were many cases of jockeys losing their balance and sustaining injuries. Except when this reasoning comes out of Wada, it comes off as a bit hypocritical. The reason for that? Well, ironically, Okabe would, years later, do that very same pose when he won with Material. But with that said, with Kato and Sirius winning the Japanese Derby for the Symboli Ranch, hopefully, the Sirius Symboli controversy can finally be laid to rest once and for all. And, well, the Japanese Derby is just the first step, because Sirius was not done. He will show everyone how much potential he has, starting with the world itself.